Welcome to my budget deck channel where I try to make decks as cheap and playable as possible. So if this is something you'd be interested in, then why not subscribe? And today, as promised, with the new Witchcrafter variant, yes, this deck can be splashed into so many different spellcaster decks and into probably like branded stuff as well. There's lots of things that you can do, fusion, summoning and whatnot, because Witchcrafter themselves don't lock you into anything. But this is finally a chance for me to combine Witchcrafter, one of my favorite decks, with some of my other favorite decks, which is Magistus. I will be mispronouncing this for the rest of eternity. But let's start right off with the card by card. We have got quite a big Witchcrafter engine on our hands. The reason for this is there's some combos where you need at least like 2 or 3 spellcasters in your hand, and that's why you want to be running quite a high monster count. And also the Witchcrafter engine only is started by basically summoning, either normal summoning a Witchcrafter or having a Witchcrafter in your hand that you then can fusion summon into the Witchcrafter fusion monster. So you want to make sure that you kind of do start with one Witchcrafter, and since the searches are limited, since we do not have access to like triple pot of prosperity and stuff like this, we do have to crank up the Witchcrafter main deck monster count from time to time if you don't want to be breaking a lot of the time, which that's kind of what I'm trying to do on my channel anyway. Yes, some deck profiles will have decks that look more powerful because you can actually jam in lots of powerful cards, but then the problem a lot of the time is you will have scenarios where you just cannot really play a card, and that is a bit sad, and I try to like not do that way, but obviously I'll be talking about what you can change. Witchcrafter Genni and Witchcrafter Schmietta are basically, I don't want to say one card fusion combos, but if you have this card or this card in hand with 2 spell cards, what you can be doing is go with this one into the other one, discard 1 spell card, then go send this one to the graveyard and special summon one of the other Witchcrafters, discard another spell card, then with this card's effect send the fusion spell to the graveyard, and with Genni's effect copy the fusion spell and then fuse with another spellcaster that you have in hand. So it's a very convoluted combo. You need 2 spell cards in hand, you need 1 spellcaster monster in hand, and then one of those 2, and obviously your opponent can't hand trap you, and then you can actually go into your Witchcrafter Vice Madam. The problem then is you still need a card or effect that triggers the effect of this card, otherwise it's a bit, well, it's still a bit iffy, but sometimes this whole combo works out. I think I've had a replay for Pure Witchcrafter that might be coming out on this channel eventually, but it is a very convoluted way to get to a fusion. Works for the Pure variant as well, so keep that one in mind. Other than that, this card is very good at copying spells from the graveyard. Most of the time, Creation and Holiday will be the cards that you will be copying, but sometimes the fusion might be coming up as well, because you can fusion summon 1 fusion monster. It's not limited to spellcaster monsters, which is good, because for some reason the Magistus fusion monster isn't a spellcaster. It's a bit mind-blowing, it's a bit annoying from time to time, especially in this variant, but in the end it is what it is. Witchcrafter Genni is one of the better Witchcrafters, I'd say. Also, there's this combo with the Magicalized Fusion. Since we do now run Artemis, you can just get basically rid of any Witchcrafter monster you have on board, link it off into this one, and then you have a spellcaster on board and 1 spellcaster in the graveyard, and then you can use Magicalized Fusion to go into your Witchcrafter Vice Madame as well. You do lose out on Artemis in the process though, which is a bit annoying because that somewhat kills your Witchcrafter combo. So if you have this card twice, then you should be playing it twice just for this combo to get a bit better. You can cut one of the fusions or one of the Xyzs. The extra deck isn't super jam-packed with good stuff, because the good stuff would be a bit more expensive. Potterie, basically to have more cards that can actually trigger your fusion monster, and a lot of the time you will be emptying your whole hand, so at the end of the turn or before the end of the turn you can actually get one of your Witchcrafter spells back that you have used this turn, then trigger the effect of this card, and so on and so on and so on. But the card that's actually better but does conflict with Pot of Prosperity is Pittore, whatever you want to call it, because this card can actually technically always use the effect. Sometimes you have to banish your whole entire hand, but a lot of the time if you only have 0 cards in hand, then you only have to banish 1 card, which isn't too bad a lot of the time, but it can always trigger the effect as well with this one. So you don't even need 1 Witchcrafter spell in your graveyard. With this one you at least need 1 Witchcrafter or card in your graveyard that you can recycle, which usually if you go into the fusion you will have, but unless you use Magicalized Fusion, and then this card is a tiny bit better in that combo. Doesn't really overly matter, but sometimes it does. Anton can obviously start drawing you into your Magistus kind of plays, any play starter basically. Most of the time not really be doing all that much because you already have normal summoned one of the Witchcrafters, but in case you haven't and then you draw one of the Magistus play starters, that can be really nice. Witchcrafter Schmietta, very, very strong card for multiple reasons, because it's level 4, which in this deck becomes special meaning as well. Sadly, this card is fire attribute, and usually this shouldn't matter at all, because why would it? But we have one card in this extra deck that is Rilliona, and Rilliona can only be made with 2 level 4 spellcaster monsters with different attributes. So if you have this card and this one, you see the issue. It cannot be used for this, so we have to circumvent this a bit when we use the effect of this card to summon out Schmietta, even from graveyard or from your hand. Then you will equip this one, and hopefully your search goes through, then you search this one, and with this card's effect, then sadly you will either, if you have another another spellcaster monster in your hand, then you can discard this one unless you really need it, but then you can send Schmietta from your field to the graveyard, because that also works with this card's effect, and then you can actually go into Rilliona as well, because that still works. So we've got that base somewhat covered. Talking about this card next, good about this card is it has not only a special summon effect, but also it is very searchable, and it has an on-field effect that you can change the attribute of this card, which doesn't matter at all. It used to matter if you go into Bahamut Shark, but since Toad is banned here, we don't have to talk about this play in general. But since this card activates its effect, let's read the fusion monster. When a spell card or effect or a non-fusion spellcaster monster effect is activated. So this card can trigger your fusion monster if it's still on board, and this will be part of the whole how you can get into both engines at the same time. So this is one of the important ones. We do only run it at 1 because technically you don't need it anymore. You can tweak the ratios to your liking. Technically you can not run this card at all and run 2 of this and whatsoever. There's lots of stuff. Since it's 2 somewhat big engines crammed together, you will have to cut certain cards, and I feel like the Witchcrafter engine right now is a tiny bit better than the Magistus engine, but both have a purpose, and for once they actually can work together. You need a very convoluted combo for it, very special stuff, but they can work. Quick addition to Schmietta, this card can obviously send 1 Witchcrafter card from your deck to your graveyard, not just a spell, but a card, which can also this effect triggers Vice Madame. You can send a card to the graveyard that then this card can fetch back to your hand, because this card can also add 1 Witchcrafter spell trap from your graveyard to your hands. So technically this is a way to get Patronus as well, don't underestimate that. That can be helpful in some situations, but you can also send Genni to the graveyard or any Witchcrafter spell that you want. A lot of the time you would be sending Bystreet if you go into just the Witchcrafter place, because this card protects you a bit, which can be very strong. Zoroa is a very nice card, rank 4 engine, a level 8 synchro engine, which is very important, and it can also be a searcher because it can equip this card from the extra deck, and then we can go out from there. Not as strong as in the pure version, or a version that plays more with level 4 spellcasters, because a lot of the time you will not be having another one in your hand. You have to kind of hope that you either have one in your graveyard. Sometimes this card is then just used to actually search a card, and then you can still go into the combos. It's still not like super hard to do, because if you don't use its effect, then you still have other ways of doing this later on. It's a whole shebang. That's why maxing out on this card sometimes doesn't work, because we do run a lot of cards that aren't level 4. It doesn't say level 4 or lower, so this also doesn't work then. In a pure version, this card is a lot better. Like this, you'd have to tweak the deck and go for a more Magistus focused deck with some small Witchcrafter engine on the side, which you can also do, but this is more focusing on the new Witchcrafter stuff rather than on the new Magistus stuff. Rilliona, very, very important card. Also, somewhat convoluted combo, but if you have this card in hand, 1 Witchcrafter and 1 other spellcaster, you can actually start your combo that can go into basically everything at this point, because with this card you can then search this one, use the 2 monsters in your hand to fusion summon, go into this card's effect, and then if you have any way of triggering this, which with Pittore you will have, which Schmietta you will have if you use them as fusion materials, or you can use another spell card. Let's say you have Holiday on board, that can do some stuff. Even if you have to Forbidden Chalice your own Rilliona after you've used their effect, that still works. There's lots of stuff to actually trigger the effect, so it's not just 2 spell cards in hand, you also have to have a way to trigger this one. And then you can summon Schmietta from your deck, use Schmietta and Rilliona to go into the extra deck Rilliona, use the extra deck Rilliona to summon out Zoroa, use Zoroa to actually go into your, get your Schmietta from the graveyard back, or get Rilliona from your graveyard back, then go into your Synchro monster, then you can equip 1 card from your Synchro monster, and so on and so on and so on. You technically can also try to get rid of Rilliona if you have another fusion in hand or something. Then you have another Xyz monster equipped to this one, then your opponent can't use Xyz monsters. There's like a whole combo, but this way you will end on the Witchcrafter engine and the Magistus engine, which is very, very strong if your opponent doesn't have like one spell trap that negates the whole board or gets rid of a lot of stuff, which can obviously happen. But this card is your gateway to it, but with a lot of extra steps. In general, this card is a very good Magistus playstart as well, because you can search Trismagistus. You technically can play the Revive spell that is basically like Holiday but for Magistus and protects your back row, at least your equipped monster back row. I didn't feel like it worked out in this kind of deck profile. In a pure version, yes, 100%, but in a version where you don't really play all that many Magistus monsters, it's nice in the grind game, but you don't really want to get into a crazy grind game anyway, and then having cards in your hand that just basically do nothing, although you can discard them with the Witchcrafter engine, so it's not terrible. I felt like it was unnecessary. Same for Theurgy. This card can help you do stuff, because if you have another spellcaster in hand, then you can search this with this card, then with this card equip Artemis, with Artemis search Crowley, discard the spellcaster, then obviously go into Rilliona and start your Magistus plays from there. So technically this is a card, if you want to be playing it, you can cut stuff like Draping if you want. You could technically cut stuff like Patronus as well, and if you want to cut certain other engine cards, if you only want to be playing one of those two and not want to go for the full package, or you don't feel like Golem or Aruru makes sense, then you can cut one of those 3 as well if you like. You could cut like 1 Potterie, depends on how you want to be playing this. This card isn't awful, but it's also not like amazing, because if you draw it, it's as much of a dead card most of the time if you don't want to be going or don't have any openings for your Magistus plays. 1 Endymion. In a pure version, this card is gold. In this version, this card does like basically the same as it would do if you would run Theurgy in combination with Rilliona, because you then equip this one. You can actually, well, the good thing about this one is it can tuck a card back into your deck and possibly draw into a different card, so you can possibly draw into one of your fusion spells, which is important, and you can then search Crowley if you have another spellcaster, start your Magistus plays again. So it's not an awful card, but I felt like this one was the best one to cut, because also it doesn't have the graveyard effect of equipping another one of your X-Rate monsters in the graveyard to this one, so it doesn't add to that one as well. The pop effect is nice because you can recycle certain stuff, you can put stuff back into the deck if you don't want it, but we don't run that many like bricks. Yes, it's nice to tuck those 2 back, that can be helpful, so it's not terrible. And you can always special summon this one out with Rilliona if you really want to put one of them back into the deck from your hand, then this can happen. So I feel like at 1 it was fine. These ones are nice. This one, another effect but the pop, your opponent cannot target other spellcaster monsters you control with card effects, which can be coming in quite handy, because this is a spellcaster. And, well, technically, like, this is a spellcaster. The only thing is, this isn't one, but your fusion is also one, so it does protect not only your Witchcrafter engine, but also your Magistus engine, so it's a tiny bit better than Bystreet when it comes to the overall protection, but sadly, it doesn't protect itself, but your opponent would still have to get rid of it, and you can still discard a spell card beforehand, pop something, and then it doesn't really matter all that much. But Verre, very good for finishing games, because your opponent has to, well, be able to get rid of this one, because it's a blanket negate, which usually doesn't matter all that much, but it can. And also the battle effect isn't terrible if you have 2 spell cards in hand. It's getting quite hard for your opponent to actually run over your monsters by battle, so this one can be very strong, although I prefer going into Haine. In the end, it's up to your own self. The problem is this card you kind of have to summon an attack position, so you open yourself up more to Lightning Storm than, for example, if you run this one. 1 Witchcrafter Golem Aruru, very easy to search with Creation, or the effect of Creation plus Genni, which can come up quite a lot as well. And this card interacts with spellcaster monster. So it's not, I don't want to call it protection because it doesn't really protect you, but it triggers on either spellcaster that is targeted. So if they target one of your Magistus cards, that's still fine. If they want to run over by battle, that's still fine. So this card does stuff for both portions of the deck. So even if you don't want to go into your Witchcrafter plays, or you don't have any way, but you started with Creation plus the Magistus package, then you can still search Golem Aruru and have another addition to your combo then that pure Magistus would probably not have. Magicalized Fusion, Miracle Fusion for spellcasters. It's quite nice, but it has issues. The thing is, this isn't a spellcaster monster, so you cannot summon it off of Magicalized Fusion. A bit of a problematic one, because if you draw this card after you've already gone into your 1 fusion, this is the problem if you don't play 2, but budget wise, you know, you want to be playing 2 of this usually. Since we only play 1, at least 2, 3 is probably not terrible either, but 2 would be the sweet spot, especially when it comes to budget. But since we don't, this card can be dead later on in the game, or if you already have other ways of fusion summoning, but Witchcrafter can always discard it. It's not terrible. And technically there are other things that you can be playing. You could be playing Supreme Arcanite Magician, because you need 1 spellcaster type Synchro monster and 1 spellcaster type monster. This is a spellcaster type Synchro monster. Not that this card's effect is in any way very good, like 3,400 attack, and you can destroy 1 card on the field. You can select 1 card. That's how old this card is. Select 1 or draw 1 card. So it has actually, it's okay, especially if you get it out with Magicalized Fusion in a later stage of the game. Would be quite nice. If you already have it for some mad reason and you don't want to get rid of it, put it in your extra deck. Like, there's that. But a card that is, I don't want to say more likely to come up, because your Magistus cards kind of banish themselves. Even the extra deck monsters that you put into the graveyard of the Magistus plays, like I said, Fiend, then you have this one Rock, so that doesn't overly matter, and you kind of don't want to banish them from the graveyard either a lot of the time. Can come up though. Like, it's not impossible to have lots of cards in spellcasters in your graveyard, although loads of your actual main deck monsters banish themselves to actually do things. So if you have it, play it. If you don't have it, you're not missing out on much. And one other card, technically you'd have to be playing something like Heartland Draco with it to have a dragon monster, and then you could go into Mysterian because it's a spellcaster monster and it needs 1 spellcaster, 1 dragon monster, so it's technically possible if you run a dragon monster in your extra deck. If you combine that with Zeus, then this card is technically not even completely useless, because you have 2 continuous spell cards, so it can actually attack directly anyway. Well, not be targeted for attacks, that's a good one. Can attack directly anyway, so that's not too bad with this kind of effect as well. Not saying you should craft this card, but if you have it and you want to do something a bit eccentric, then here you go. This card, very good, searches you Witchcrafters and can technically bait out Ash Blossoms. Witchcrafters obviously have this problem that if you use the card's effect, then it can't return to your hand, but we have the fusion out that circumvents this a bit. Holiday, very nice, also helps you going into the double combo if you then send a card to the graveyard, or if you summon Zoroa out and then go into place, and then you can still holiday your card back, and then you can have 2 engines going on. So this card is, for me, a 3-off because we focus more on the Witchcrafter engine, but I understand if people would want to cut it down. Magistus Invocation, very, very strong card, helps you going into either of your fusions, so very nice, searchable. It's just better than Poly in this deck, and that's the main reason why I ran it. And don't forget, you can actually use your equip cards for fusion summoning. Sometimes that comes in handy if you, for example, like equip stuff with those 2 and then stuff gets ashed and or negated, then you can still use the equipped card and this one to actually go into a fusion and at least have 1 disruption for your opponent's turn. The Power of Prosperity, very important in this deck, mainly because you don't have many draw cards. It can OTK, but it's mainly go first deck, so it doesn't really matter. And getting parts of your combo is crucial. Also, Ash Blossom Bait and your extra deck has lots of cards that don't really matter. The spell is nice. At 1 it's fine. You can run it at 2 if you have it at 2 and if you want to. Sometimes you can be breaking on it if you draw too many, plus having 1 of it can enable this whole combo that I was talking about at the start with Schmietta and Genni. Doesn't really matter, but it can come up, and it's searchable by Patronus, so that's nice as well. Bystreet for protection, Trismagistus for, well, this is also a way how you can get both packages going, because then you don't waste your normal summon. If you draw this with 1 of the Magistus monsters, you can just normal special summon that one then, and then you still have your normal summon for one of your Witchcrafter plays, and so on and so on and so on. So this card helps. You can play it at 2. I felt like it wasn't necessary because you don't have that many level 4 monsters, although it works on Schmietta too, so it's not terrible if you want to be running it at 2 as well. Forbidden Chalice, it's a spell card, it's a power spell, it's good going second, good going first, that's why I crammed this in here, you know the drill. Witchcrafter Draping, good against back row decks, good against floodgates. You don't have to run it, but it can be important and it's fairly searchable, so there's that. And one Unveiling, just in case stuff stuck on your hand. You have access to it with the whole Schmietta and Genni combo, you have access to it with Patronus. It does stop your opponent from reacting to a Witchcrafter play, so it can come up. Yeah, I feel like 1 is fine, but I definitely did want to include it at 1, but you can do with it whatever you want. But make sure you actually keep a nice amount of Witchcrafter spells in this deck, because the problem with this one is that if you don't have enough, then it doesn't matter if you can add stuff back from your graveyard. If you just don't have any Witchcrafter spells in your graveyard anyway, then triggering this card isn't too easy, and also utilizing its full effect isn't too good. So you want to make sure that you run at least, like, in my opinion, I would say at least like 9. Depends on, because you have ways of setting it up with the Schmietta, for example, and so on and so on. So it's not terrible, and you run other spell cards that sometimes you don't need in your hand, so it's not too bad, but yeah, it is what it is sometimes. Patronus, very, very good card, in my opinion. It doesn't really help you with OTKing and whatnot and going first. It feels a bit iffy, but at least it's a spell card in your hand, because the effect can shuffle one of your spellcaster monsters that is banished on your graveyard. So you can reset actually Magistus plays as well. The extra deck monsters, get them back to the extra deck if you want to, so you can redo these combos. You can recycle the Magistus monsters that banish themselves back to the deck. You can recycle stuff like that you only run 1 off, like this one or this one, if you need to search it again, which can be nice. You can recycle Artemis, which is nice. You can obviously recycle your fusion monster, which is nice. You can recycle Schmietta and Genni that banish themselves, and so on, and it will be adding 1 spell card to your hand. A lot of the time I choose to go for Bystreet, because this is the card that if I send it to the graveyard in the turn that I search it, at the end of my next turn it will actually come back, not to my hand, but to the field, and then has an effect, because the other ones would then just stay in your graveyard unless you have your fusion up, because if you don't, then that is a bit of a problem, because then yes, during the end phase you get Holiday back, but it doesn't do anything, and this card actually does stuff. So that's my reasoning behind it. But if you know what you can do the next turn, if you already have a play, regardless, you can go for your fusion, you can search stuff. Holiday is a very nice thing. If you already know that you won't be discarding it anyways, then this sets up your play for the next turn as well. And the graveyard effects can come in handy in the grind game. If your opponent actually gets rid of this card because they feel a bit annoyed with it, then you can banish it, or you can send it to the graveyard by Schmietta and add some banished spell cards to your hand. Can come in handy if you're playing against Runic, for example, that just banish your stuff at will. The extra deck, triple of this, you can cut it down to 2. I feel like 2 is a bit of the sweet spot. 3 more of the time is a bit too much, but 1 might not be enough. Very nice disruption and boosts your monster by 1000 attack. Keep in mind that if you have this on board, it during your opponent's turn, once they just summon 1 monster, it will also increase the lock of this one, because the cards don't have to be attached to this card, they just have to be in your spell trap card zone. So you will still get the fusion lock if you use this card's effect, because this will go to your spell trap card zone then, and you'll still have that lock. 1 of this, but you want to be playing 2 if you have it. 1 of this because it's very nice protection. If you hard make it, which you can nuke your opponent's board, which can be somewhat helpful against certain back row decks, so that's not terrible. We have Zoroa, which is quite nice, well, one of the big monsters. The problem is it lacks certain protection. We have this one, so you want to be setting up when you can, but most important I feel like is locking your opponent actually out of all of the other ones. Although there is Punk and there are some synchro decks, I feel like Xyz and Link against Sprite and against Branded, the fusion stuff is actually, well, it's better, so that's a bit of an issue. If the meta is more synchro-y, then this card would become a lot more useful, because then it doesn't only shut your opponent off from using synchro effects, but also you have the protection on it and you don't have to choose between either or, so that's something like this. And you can bring this card back, which is quite fun. And with Witchcrafters, you have lots of level 8 monsters, so you could run rank 8s in this deck if you want to, but you don't have to. We have Diamond Crab in here. At this point I didn't know what rank 4s to put in. Just if you need a 3000 attack point monster, we have this. But like I said, this one can be funny, especially for attacking directly. And there's lots of other rank 4s. Baguska comes to mind, good ones that you can be running. Even Tornado Dragon, if you still want to be going for this combo, Tornado Dragon. Or is Tornado Dragon a worm? Actually, I think Tornado Dragon might be worm. Don't quote me on that, but I don't think it's actually a dragon. I might be wrong though. We have triple Nina Aruru. 2 is probably fine, because this card can help you with destroying back row. And 2, I feel like I do prefer. It can also add your stuff back to your hand. It can get your Witchcrafter plays going again, but it takes very long. It actually can add you 1 level 4 or higher spellcaster monster from your graveyard to your hand though, so you can recycle Golem Aruru, which is quite nice. So it's not terrible, but mainly use it for the second effect because it can actually pop a spell trap card. Rilliona, very nice second effect, very nice first effect. Going second, it can negate monster effects, but you kind of do want to be using it for its first effect, starting your Magistus plays, which is very, very strong, and only using 2 level 4 spellcasters with different attributes. That's quite nice. Would want to be running 2, but 1 is fine. A Sophiel, just going second. Sometimes you need some removal, and this card does it. Like I said, rank 4s work the way it does. You can obviously put in some link monsters that are stronger than this one as well. 1 Artemis, I think 2 would be a bit better, but 1 is fine. Croshy, because there are some combos that you can be doing with Magicalized Fusion and stuff. You run a Fusion deck and then you can get Witchcrafters back, and since this card doesn't negate the effects of it, it is actually not too bad. Also, you can get your Magistus place going with this one if you send one of them to the graveyard by Fusion summoning. You can use it easily, but sometimes you have a bit of an issue. And if you want to be using the cross shape combo, so you have a card you can go into afterwards, Deco Talker, Budget Hero, bit of protection, bit of attack. This card is overall solid still. Funny enough that because this card is one of the first links to ever come out, and it still is a lot better than a few other ones that came out afterwards. I think for a budget deck it still works. Obviously there's better choices if you want to play good link 3s. Nightmare Unicorn comes to mind, Zero Boros is a thing, I think, or you know, the one that banishes back row, and so on and so on and so on. But this card isn't terrible. Cards you could be playing: Magician's Soul, Illusion of Chaos. They do stuff if you want to, but you'd cram lots of stuff in your deck. Obviously Caught by the Grave, because hand traps are annoying. Triple talent Tactics, going first, going second, can be very helpful, and it's a power spell card, so keep that one in mind. And we go on to the rating. Let's not overcomplicate this. We start with the power level, the strength of this deck, which I would rate a 4, because mainly if you can set up the best board possible with this deck, it's nearly a 5. Like, it's very, very good. But first of all, the deck kind of crumbles for under hand traps a bit, so the average board will be more on the lower end of a 3 that you will be doing if you play the deck somewhat competitively. And also, the best board that you can produce is still somewhat weak to certain cards, certain power spells and stuff, so it does crumble under certain effects as well. So I'll give it like a solid 4. It could be a bit better, but it also could be a lot worse, especially for a deck that is reasonably cheap and still reasonably fun to play. So I would say a 4 is justified. Talking about consistency, I would give it a 4 out of 5. It's so close to a 5 because it's very consistent, but it's not super consistent in bringing out the best board. It's just consistent in a way that in 9 out of 10 hands, you will be able to do something. Like, you will not sit there and be like, oh, set 1, set pass, whatever. You will be able to do something because this deck has lots of searchers, but hand traps kind of cripple it a little bit, and also, yeah, the plays that you do with it aren't amazing, and it's okay. It's okay, so I'll give it a 4. When it comes to budget value, so close to 5 because it is very nice, because it has 2 different decks in it. The only thing that's lacking is like power staples that you can run in most decks. It's mainly spellcaster focused. You've seen you can splash certain other decks in it, so that's good. It's not very expensive. Neither of the 2 engines are expensive at all, and mixing them together is also nice. So it's a very strong 4 as well. But for a 5, I think 5s are mainly in terms of budget decks, because it's only this specific deck I'm talking about reserved for like the structure decks and stuff. If a very good structure deck comes out, then those will usually score a 5 because you have 1,500 gems, get lots of staples, at least some staples, maybe even like decks that you can mix with, and so on and so on. So this one is a strong 4, but in the end, very solid deck. It does stuff. It's reasonably competitive, but obviously has, well, it lacks certain things. It lacks hand traps, so going second isn't all that strong, and it does, well, it doesn't become overly repetitive because the combos do vary. Obviously, most decks have somewhat the same combo, so it's always a bit like this. but the power level could be a tiny bit higher considering what crazy stuff is running Rampage in the meta anyway. So yeah, 444 sounds like a good deal for this specific deck. Don't say like I'm not recommending buying it. I would definitely do because I love it and that's why I've got it. But there is more competitive stuff around if you care about this one. And on to the reblue. First things first, we can see we do not have a fusion spell in our hand, so going into the whole Witchcrafter combo would be a bit hard. Technically, you can use the combo that I described earlier, where you can put Schmietta onto board, then discard the Witchcrafter Draping, summon Genni, discard the Chalice, summon any other Witchcrafter monster, then Schmietta banish itself, send the fusion from deck, then Genni banish itself as well, and use the effect of the fusion monster, fusion summon with Potterie in your graveyard, or fusion summon with this one in your graveyard from your hand and the one on the field, or the both in the hand, and then go on from there. So you'd have like another Witchcrafter on board whose effect you technically could be using then during your opponent's turn. You have the fusion on board, so you could be doing this, but I decided to go for the Magistus combo because one Ash Blossom could basically stop the Magistus combo, but one Ash Blossom doesn't stop this combo, so I felt like this was the better choice. But here, one impermanence or effect Veiler does kind of stop the combo, so we have to make these kind of split-second decisions. What can you be doing? Theoretically, even if they max seed here, we would only need to use 2 special summons to do something, so I felt like this one was the better play compared to the other one. Now we use the effect of this one, summon Schmietta. Now we use the effect of Artemis to search the cards that actually does stuff. Crowley here. We then use the Crowley effect to send Potterie to the graveyard, so we have 3 monsters on board. Now we go into our Rilliona, because our Rilliona actually does stuff and summons out one monster from our deck, which will be our Rilliona. The other one, the younger one, the different one, search the fusion spell. We use the fusion to send those 2 to the graveyard, because then we have the Xyz in the graveyard and we can actually equip it. So we have the fusion monster on board. We will now be going into the Synchro monster, which the Synchro monster also has the option to use the protection now, because we can actually search the protection out of the extra deck with this card's effect, equip it with this. Then we have Crowley in our graveyard. We can equip the Xyz monster, so we have the lock with the Xyz, and we have Rilliona in our graveyard, so we can actually banish this one as well and go for the Link one. And since we have this on board as well, as soon as your opponent uses one monster, you can actually yoink that one, and then you have all 4 cards plus protection, which is very, very strong. We still also have Schmietta in the graveyard, so we can use the effect of this card and banish it, send to the graveyard one Pittore's effect, because we have Draping, we don't need it, so we can discard it. We actually draw into a good card with this, so this is what the Witchcrafter engine added to this one specifically in this version. Sometimes you might have, in the pure Magistus variant, you either would have drawn into some hand traps or into some Magistus cards that wouldn't have done anything anymore, because this is basically the best board you can do in Magistus in the first place. But nowadays we have the Witchcrafter engine, so we discard Draping, we use the search effect, and the search effect searches us Golem Aruru. Sadly, Draping doesn't come back because we don't control a Witchcrafter monster. It would have been nice if you just had to have like a spellcaster monster on board, but I understand why it is that way. So we have another monster negate, we have some protection for this card if it gets attacked, we have locks for the extra deck, so this should be somewhat fine unless the opponent uses some crazy blowout cards, and they might in the end. They go for Sprite, so it's obviously Sprite deck. I could have negated this here, but no, they only have to go into some extra deck stuff, and if I keep this one, even if they get rid of this, I could still negate the extra deck monster, because if I negate this, they might have a Sprite card in hand and still start the combo, and for the extra deck monsters, I'm safe anyway with these ones, and this one, since this is protected, they can't get rid of it, I still have the effect of this card, so I am safe, so I don't need to blow my negate on this one. Now they can do whatever they want, and they actually do have Forbidden Droplet. Bit of a weird interaction here coming up. They will get rid of some bricks in their hand, which works out fine for them. I can't respond to it, so I can't actually use the effect of this card either. The fun fact is, if this card gets negated, the card that it searched, that it equipped from the extra deck, falls off. I don't know if this is meant to be like this. I don't quite understand. If one of you is like very, very rule wise, then please let me know why only this one falls off, because the other one are the ones that have been equipped with the other effect. For some reason then this sounds as this is the continuous effect that this card stays equipped. This is all how I can explain it. So we did lose the protection here, which is somewhat unfortunate, but we still have one more in hand that they possibly have forgotten about. Now they think they can actually be fine because this card's effect doesn't work anymore, so they can use the effect of Gigantic Sprite, can activate it, but here comes the next negate, swoop. That's why I kept it actually. They can't negate it because they only have Sprite red, and we don't have any monster effects we can't be using anyway. Now they think, oh, I can attack over this one, but you cannot. Go back to extra deck. Could have added like Draping back to my hand instead of bouncing this, but then they would have just run over this, so I didn't want to. And then they surrender because the next turn our effects will be coming back and we can basically just OTK them from that point onwards. So this was more of a Magistus playstyle, but fueled by some of the Witchcrafter stuff that the pure Magistus variant would not have access to. On we go. You can see it's a more Witchcrafter focused hand. We do have a fusion here, which is quite good. They play Witchcrafter as well. It's a 60 deck variant, so I'm pretty sure they play in that grass. Don't know what else was in there, but that's probably one of the best plays they can do if they don't draw grass, which is quite fun. I'm quite glad they didn't, because grass is a 2, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So if they draw it, crazy. If not, then yeah, you'll be producing a board that was, before the fusion of Witchcrafters came out, like somewhat the standard board of Witchcrafter anyway, so they don't lose much on power if they have a Witchcrafter starter, and there will be other cards in this deck that do stuff as well, so probably other engines to be playing as well. So we have to be dealing with one field negate and the protection for this one, so it's not too easy to get rid of it, but it's not too crazy, and they still might have hand traps or other kind of traps here that actually do stuff. Now we have multiple options here. Going for Genni seemed the best option for me. Technically, I could have already instantly fused, but then I didn't. I mean, in the end, I could have instantly fused and have this kind of negate with Forbidden Chalice anyway, but I wanted to find a way how to get rid of both of these cards from the field so they don't have it for next turn. But obviously just using the fusion effect would have done nothing, because that would have just popped this, then this card would have stayed on board, and then next turn this card would have just come back, and so on and so on and so on. So I tried to go for a bit of a different variant. I kind of chanced it here, because mainly if they had Ash Blossom I would be kind of screwed. I hoped with 60 cards they wouldn't have this. It is what it is in the end. I thought if worst comes to worst and they have an Ash Blossom, I still have this combo, because I can still use Genni's effect, banish this card and Genni, then search another Witchcrafter and then go for the combo. So in the end it's more of a bait, but I'll lose my normal summon, so this was kind of the trade-off. And they actually did draw the Ash Blossom in a 60 card deck. Fun. So I had to resort to my original play that I could have just done from the start, but now I got the Ash Blossom out, so actually it did work in my favor. Sometimes you have to be thinking a few steps ahead, and considering your opponent might have Ash Blossom or Maxi is one of the big things that you can't get around most of the time. So we now search Schmietta, because Schmietta actually does stuff in the graveyard as well, so we can trigger the effect of the fusion monster. We have a fusion, so we go into the fusion. Now we sadly can't clear the board as much as I wanted to, but that is what it is. Using Schmietta's effect, that triggers the effect of the fusion, which is very, very nice. And also we can send stuff to the graveyard. They try to negate that. Little do they know I have a Chalice. Technically, if I had another card in my graveyard, I could have triggered this effect again, because this is a spellcaster monster triggering the effect, and also I could have triggered the destruction effect. Whenever I do it, doesn't really matter since I had the negate. It is what it is. I could have chained it to that one to pop Bystreet as well. Didn't really feel like I needed to at that point, because I'll be summoning out one of my Witchcrafters anyway. We sent to the graveyard Witchcrafter spell, which we can add back with this card, which is quite nice. Then we activate Potterie and send our last remaining interaction to the graveyard, and they did draw into Called by the Grave as well, a card that I didn't expect at this point. So we will not be getting more extenders, sadly, which is a bit annoying, but we can do it during their turn. And since we are in the mirror match, this card is insane if you are the one that has it first, because obviously your opponent's Witchcrafter spells activate in the graveyard as well at the end of their turn, so you can gain even more resources from that. And they all have spellcaster monsters, they use spell cards a lot, so this card, getting it out in the mirror match before your opponent is very, very, very crucial. They use a spell card, so I can chain the effect of this to it now, and actually realize, because this is the end of my turn, so I have to pop this card. Not that it really makes much of a difference. I actually choose to act back Holiday, which doesn't really matter too much because I don't have a Witchcrafter monster in my graveyard. would have come back to my end step anyway. Didn't really matter if I popped this or not, because I didn't really have anything else to trigger this. Probably should have done it. I probably should have procced this card, because then if the opponent used any other card during their turn, any spell card, any effect of the card, then I would have been able to pop this one, but then they could have still just changed the effect of Madame and actually negated my monster's effect. So in the end, I didn't feel like it mattered too much, but they can do this now, and they would have gotten it back in the end phase. So in the end, we would have been at the exact same point if I had used the effect, but obviously, technically you want to be doing that. Still, in case your opponent doesn't see that line. Now they actually use effect during the end phase, and that triggers my effect, and now I decide to summon out one of my Witchcrafters, which is very important for the next turn. They get a creation to the hand, so they can still negate stuff, but it doesn't really matter overly. We draw into another fusion, which doesn't really matter because we don't have a Magistus card that we could use this for, sadly, so we can just discard it, trigger the effect of Ice Madame to chain block as well, which is quite fun. We destroy Bystreet now. They didn't go for the negate here, but wouldn't have really mattered, because then I think this would have negated first, and then the effect of this would have triggered. Since this card isn't on board anymore because it tribute itself, you would have still gotten this one that wouldn't have been negated then, so maybe they just wanted to keep it for that. Might have been a good play here, actually. Now we are triggering the effect of this one again, and they realize we've got so much. They know we still have Holiday in our hand, so there was so much that we could have done, and we probably could have OTK'd here as well. It is what it is. In the end, I've probably not played optimal from both of us, but that is what the Witchcrafter package does, and how you can still do it with the Magistus package as well, because you have more spellcasters now, you have more of the fusion, so you will get into the fusion more often, and so on. I hope I could showcase the deck a bit more. Sadly, I didn't find a good replay where I can show what the end board looks like of both decks. I'll just pop in a screenshot at one point in the community tab if you stay tuned. Hopefully you have a good day. Leave a like, comment, subscribe.